What's up, and welcome to the Unwatchables. This here is a show where we talk movies, but not just any movies. Here we talk about what we call one-timers and no-timers. One-timers are movies that we recommend seeing once, just for the viewing, but maybe not for a second time. And no-timers are, you guessed it, movies that we recommend you see 0 times and do not spend your money on.
So the two movies we're going to talk about today are Bright 2017 and Focus 2015. We're calling Bright a no-timer and Focus a one-timer. So Bright, basically the plot is Training Day, meets Lord of the Rings. It's basically a buddy cop film that has political undertones that never come to fruition. So Danny, first off, I guess I might as well introduce who's doing this. I'm Marcus. I'm joined by Danny and Kylie. And so Danny, what are your thoughts about Bright?
Yeah, I think buddy cop movie, but not really, because buddy cop movies are usually funny. And this one tries to be funny, but it really misses the mark in both dialogue and tone. And so I guess overall that caused a sort of dissonance between... I felt like they were making two different movies. I felt like the director had one vision and the writer had another vision, and they never really gelled together. And so the movie, I just watched it for the first time, just before recording this podcast a few hours ago. And it's just so chaotic, and there's so much jam-packed into this 2-hour runtime that I honestly don't even recall large portions of it at this very moment.
Well, from a storytelling standpoint, where do you think that this film really goes wrong?
Well, in my opinion, at least, I didn't feel as though there was enough exposition, and there are definitely movies where there is overkill exposition, but there is a way to do it tastefully, and I just felt like there wasn't enough in this film for me to even know what was going on. I felt like there needed to be more introduction into this world, into this universe that we were being brought into, but I didn't really understand enough about the relationships between the classes, between like the elves and the humans and the orcs and such, and they sort of hinted at it all throughout about 2,000 years ago, and there was this war that started between the orcs and the humans, but other than that, there just wasn't really enough for me to understand what was going on, and I felt lost in the chaos as well.
Yeah, and then the elves come into it, and then there's good elves who are really rich that run the world, and then there's this renegade group of elves, and then there's the Fed elf who is hunting the other elves, played by Edgar Ramirez in a very strange-looking makeup. Story-wise, narratively, where it went wrong, it's difficult to really say.
You're saying there's a lot of different culprits for that part?
Yeah, I think... Clearly, there's a lot of mythology behind it. Max Landis wrote the script. I think it was an original script, and clearly put a lot of work into building out this backstory, and enough so that I think it could support a series. I think when I was watching it, actually, I thought, why didn't they make this like a 10-episode Netflix series instead of a movie? Because there seems to be enough lore there to support it.
Yeah, that's one thing that I feel like for Bright, even though I didn't really like the film much at all, obviously we're going to dive into it far more. The fact that every scene looks so dark, the fact that the plot's all over the place. But one thing that I do actually like about it is the lore. I feel like there are a lot of really interesting ideas that get brought up and then never really fleshed out, I guess. Because like what you're saying, because the film's only, 2 hours and 5 minutes, however long it is.
Yeah.
They can only put so much in it, but I almost feel like with this movie, it seemed like it would have almost made a better book, even. Like the idea of, these fairy mythical creatures meeting cops in the real world today, that sounds very interesting. Like if you just read that, you're like, oh, that sounds really cool. But then in practice, when you see Will Smith wielding a sword, they're trying to wrangle that homeless man, it just looks totally ridiculous.
Yeah, in terms of ideas not coming to fruition, they were talking about some dark overlord or something the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And nothing ever really came of that, because I guess the main antagonist was this elf woman who was his assistant, for lack of a better term. I can't remember what she called herself.
Yeah, she was like his servant. She was whatever he needed her to be. I think they were trying to bring her back, and it just didn't come to fruition because Will Smith is a Bright, and he was able to vanquish her with the wand. But there's just a lot of stuff that isn't really tidied up. On top of the fact that I thought a lot of the dialogue was If I'm being kind, it was uninspired. It,
Well, if you're unkind, what would you say?
There's a lot of negativity already on the internet. We don't need to add to it with my unkind words.
What did you think about the dynamic between Will Smith and, gosh, what's that other actor's name?
It's Joel Edgerton.
Okay.
Joel Edgerton, actually, his character is my favorite part of the movie, as Nick Jacoby, as his orc partner. I mean, I think that aspect of it I somewhat liked. It kind of follows the traditional beats of any buddy cop movie where they kind of don't like each other, and Will Smith is sort of like the wild card. He's gonna be the kind of the man in charge, and then he's got this partner with him who's just kind of sort of by the book and toes the line. But they share similarities in that Will Smith isn't really liked by his fellow human cops, and then Joel Edgerton's character he's called unblooded. He's not part of the orc community. His fangs are filed down, and so there is a empathy that you have for them in that way, and then that kind of ties them together. So I thought that was okay. Specifically, the words that they exchange with one another, can't say that I'm a huge fan of.
Is this the worst pairing that Will Smith's ever had, where he's supposed to have a buddy friend that's a cop? I mean, because would you say this is a worse pairing than Kevin Kline and him in Wild Wild West? Is this a worse pairing than him and Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black?
It's definitely worse than Tommy Lee Jones and Men in Black. I thought those were good.
I actually like the pairing of Kevin Kline and Will Smith in Wild Wild West. I like that. I don't know. I guess maybe. I kind of like that movie.
You know what I'm thinking is in I, Robot, when he was paired with Bridget Moynihan. Yeah. She was kind of like the rigid partner that he was allied with. Maybe it's better than that.
I thought in I, Robot, I would have said the buddy cop friendship was him and the robot.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking for a second.
It could go both ways.
Kylie, I mean, I guess if you were in charge of this movie, what would you change? Like, what are some major plot things that you would rearrange?
Well, I think I might take out the whole concept of the Dark Lord just because that just seemed like a vice to get a sequel. So I'd remove that because I think that a movie that was this bad does not deserve a sequel, and I don't think they have one in the works.
They do.
They do?
They greenlit a sequel, yeah.
Well, this film, there's no way to track if it even made money or not, so I guess.
They spent $90 million on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, in terms of, like, we don't know if all Netflix movies, we have no idea if they make money.
Right.
That's the thing about this, though, that it kind of irks me the most is that Netflix paid $90 million for this, and that included $3 million, which is, a pretty huge sum for the spec script, which Max Landis wrote. And so I understand, like, if you're going in to pitch this movie and you say, okay, there's two cops in the LAPD, but instead of fighting traditional gangs, they're fighting, orc and elf gangs.
They're fighting the orcish horde.
It's high concept. Yeah, it's high concept, and I can understand the appeal of that in a pitch. But then when you get the draft of the script and you just see what's laid out in front of you, they're really just a really unsubtle and unnuanced, allegory for racism being replaced by orcism, I guess, if you want to call it that. And just the dialogue and the last act, I mean, the last sequence of the movie is, I think, just atrociously paced and structured. Mm-hmm. And the whole movie takes place in one night. I don't know if you like...
Yeah, it's like over the course of 8 hours. Right?
Yeah, and I didn't realize that until near the end. I'm like, wow, this is a really bad first day back from the job.
You mentioned a spec script. Maybe for the people listening that don't know what that is, maybe define, or could you describe that a little bit? A spec
script is just a script that you're not getting paid to write, essentially. You write it with the hopes that, it's good, it can sell, or more realistically, if it's going to get you other work in the future. But it's basically a script that, hasn't been commissioned by anyone at that point. So I believe you wrote it on spec. I'm not 100%
And you mentioned
sure
that it's Max Landis. For people that might not know this, the person who wrote this screenplay is the son of John Landis, who did Blues Brothers. He directed Thriller. He did American Werewolf in London. Yeah, John Landis. Gosh, I'm blanking on what else he did. He did several 80s films for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean... well, I guess there's that was the point. And then too, so this film, so it's written by Max Landis, and then the director is the guy that made Training Day.
Yeah, David Ayers.
David Ayer. And
well, he wrote Training Day. He directed
directed End of Watch, Suicide Squad, and Fury. And I know a lot of people really hate on Suicide Squad, and I mean, yeah, it wasn't necessarily a great movie, but I didn't necessarily hate this. So, you know, my mindset going into Bright, like I watched it right when it came out, like whenever, December, whatever, of 2017. And, yeah, I went into it thinking, well, okay, I liked Fury. I heard really good things about End of Watch. I had obviously loved Training Day. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's, you know, maybe there could be something here. Maybe it's, you know, there could be something to this plot. I was thinking, you know, this maybe Training Day, meets Fellowship of the Ring.
It's significantly worse than both those movies. It's there's a lot of like, it's really weird, like the depiction of Mexicans in the movie. I don't know if you caught this, but like, you know, it's like the gangs that are kind of in the neighborhood, right, where the wand is, and everybody wants this wand, right? This wand is like the shit. And
that's what that's the whole plot of the film, is them having the wand and getting chased constantly.
And it just feels episodic after a while. Sorry, it feels episodic because, you know, they are in one situation, there's a lot of gunfighting, they take the wand, they move to another spot, you know, whether it's a club or a gas station, people come, there's more gunfighting, and there's the wand. And after a while, it just got tiresome. Like, what is anything else ever going to happen? Is we're going to see this wand in use? And I don't know how many times these kind of Mexican gangs walked into a place and started firing machine guns into the ceiling, and without any other kind of police presence like coming. I didn't understand that.
Well, that's one thing that I definitely don't like with these kind of cop action films, is that they establish that cops exist. Like in certain action films, they almost want you to believe that police don't exist. You know, they'll destroy a half a city block and there won't be anybody. There won't be any cops. There won't be anybody mentioning cops. In this film, they are literally cops that are responding to like a domestic disturbance call. So you know that cops exist in this world. Like you said, I mean, that gang, they go into the strip club and they shoot up the place. No cops. The only other cop we see in the film after they kill the 4 cops in the beginning is that one sheriff who handcuffs them.
Yeah.
The Officer Alamo.
Yeah, that was another weird thing. Like, he brings up the Alamo and Will Smith references Shrek, and I'm thinking like that. So this 2,000-year history with the orcs, and like, that didn't change anything of our human history timeline. That remains intact clearly, but we just add these mythical creatures into it.
I listened to a review by the Cosmonaut Variety Hour YouTube channel, and he mentioned that. He's like, wait a minute. So the movie Shrek takes place and no one... Because you have to imagine, if you're in that world, right, that there's all this almost like racial divide between orcs and elves and humans.
Yeah.
You make a film like Shrek, which is basically how he's an ogre, but kind of like an orc a little bit. How he's being rejected by humans and how humans mistreat him. And everybody in that universe still loves Shrek.
In that world, Shrek is a prestige biopic.
Well, he calls the one guy Shrek. Remember when when they're getting jumped? He's like, you ugly mother effing Shrek.
Yeah, get back to Fiona. That's just lazy writing. I mean, that's...
Well, can you imagine that if all of these other real life events happened and it just happens to be orcs? Like, what's even the point? Like, because you're right. Like, so the Alamo still happens in that universe, regardless if there's orcs or wizards and whatnot, if there exists or not. I mean, isn't that kind of a huge continuity issue? Like, I've heard, Quentin Tarantino, I heard him talk about this once where he said that when he works on a character and he works on their motivations and who they are, he likes to answer as many questions as he can about that character, even if it's not necessarily shown in the film. He likes to logically think out how that character would react in certain situations, what their backstory would be, even if it's not mentioned. I mean, don't you think from a screenwriting standpoint that you would kind of list out how the world would change? I mean, you can't say everything is going to be exactly the same, but the world isn't exactly the same. I mean, did Rodney King happen in this LA?
A really easy way to avoid that is just don't mention the Alamo or Shrek.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that a consistency issue that they should have brought up?
Yeah, because in this world, the elves seem to kind of rule everything, and they're not really explicit in whether or not they are the governing body as well. They're just really rich.
We have no idea what the government looks like in this. That'd be an interesting movie. I want to see if the sequel touches on that aspect of it, like maybe Nick Jacoby's running for like senator in California.
He's running for like city council.
Maybe he's the mayor. Maybe mayor. That'd be good.
Mayor Jacoby.
Yeah, sounds legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking now of the guy Jacob. Oh no, what's the guy with Jalen Rose that does the reviews? Is his name Jalen?
His name is Jacoby.
Yeah, Jacoby. Yeah, I'm thinking of that Jacoby now with his messed up nose. His nose is coming off his face.
Oh. All right. Yeah, I don't know what he looks like. I've just heard the name.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you gotta watch the clip. Yeah, Kylie, what were some of your other thoughts? Like, what'd you think about the fact that Will Smith was a Bright? Was that so predictable that it would have been more shocking had he not been a Bright?
I think so. I just thought that parts of it were super overwritten, like just every scene that was so just explosive with over the top special effects. I would have dialed down so much. I just thought it wasn't tasteful how overdone it was, and I mean the parts that were underwritten. I just feel like the dialogue between the partners Jacoby and Daryl, it wasn't funny to me. Everything fell flat. I mean, it just makes me wonder if they even took the time to do a table read of any of this. I mean, I just felt like none of the dialogue read easily at all. It just seemed really unnatural to me. So that was one of my least favorite parts. Was just the dialogue.
Yeah, the when you're talking about when the Bright reveal at the end of the movie, there's a scene when. Yeah, there's a scene earlier when the feds pick up, or when the feds are interrogating that guy who's like part of the Shield of Light, you know, the homeless guy.
Yeah.
And in that interrogation scene, I mean, this is an exposition dump, like a classic exposition dump, right? Because they're asking questions and he's just feeding us this information. But he says, the homeless guy says, only 1 in a million humans can be a Bright. And at that moment, I was like, okay, well, clearly 1 in a million is Will Smith, because why else would he have said that line? It's totally telegraphed, and you know, there's just a way to be more clever about it if that's the way you want the story to go, more subtle. I don't know.
I mean, if we're going by those statistics, if it's 1 in a million, that means that there's 7,000 on the planet then?
Yeah, maybe it was more than 1 in a million. I don't remember the exact ratio he gave, but it was something like that. And it doesn't sound that rare, right? When you put it in those terms.
When you put it, I mean, if we're going by the same idea that there's as many people on the planet today as there in our world as there would be in the Bright world, I mean, yeah, like 1 in a million is rare, but
well, presumably there'd be less humans because many of them died fighting in the great orc wars of yore.
That happened too. Yeah.
You know, those great wars.
You know, is Bright basically what would happen if Peter Jackson, because obviously, you know, he's getting worse as time goes by. Is this film basically like when Peter Jackson, when he goes and meets with the people at Warner Brothers and says, I want to do another Lord of the Rings? Did Bright kind of give us a little preview of what his next Lord of the Rings would look like?
I don't think so.
Like in a bad way?
I don't see Peter Jackson kind of treading in these waters.
Hey, did you remember how bad the Hobbits were?
They weren't great, but they're not on this level. You know, we're not going to do a Hobbits unwatchable.
I mean, I don't know. Some of them are bad though.
Agreed, but I don't see it as
it was obviously not as bad as this. But I wouldn't be shocked if Peter Jackson saw this movie and he thought, oh, maybe there could be something here for me to do in the future.
Yeah.
Well, I am wondering what you guys thought about Jacoby being brought back to life. I wanted to know your guys' opinions on that.
So the first thing I thought about for that scene is that scene is the inverse of what happens in Training Day. So you remember in Training Day when Ethan Hawke, he's in the bathtub, right? And that guy's going to kill him. And then he pulls out the photo and he's like, what are you doing with my niece, cuz? And he's like, oh, you know, I swear I just helped her out earlier to remember she was going to get raped by those guys, and he helps her, right? In this film, right, Jacoby helps out the boy whose father is the gang orc guy.
Yeah.
And the boy tells his dad, he's like, oh, you know, these guys, they helped me earlier today.
That's
and his
true.
his dad kind of like pats him on the shoulder and he says, all right, well, you still got to kill him anyways. Like,
well, he kills
told him
him.
to leave.
Yeah.
Said you can't be here.
Yeah.
But like, that reminded me so much of Training Day, like the bad version of Training Day. That scene, because that scene in Training Day, you're like, wow, what are the odds? But in Training Day, it was a very epic scene, right, where he's in the bathtub. And,
Yeah. Well, there's no sense in comparing this to Training Day, because Training Day, it is not in any way at all.
I mean, it's just, I mean, they had the same guy
Yeah.
worked on both, but I just, that was the first thing that it reminded me of, was that scene
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Training Day.
Yeah, I mean, they had talked about in the movie that there was a prophecy, right? And he was prophesied. That's what the homeless guy that they picked up said to him. And so when he was resurrected, they never really explained what the prophecy was, or maybe they did and I just missed it. But, I mean, it obviously draws parallels to other kind of religious stories that we have in our human canon. And I come to think of it now, I don't even know what happened with that prophecy. What was the end point of him being resurrected? Was he, I guess, just him being accepted by those other orcs at the end of the movie, those 5 random orcs who were just there and like give him the fist, whatever that was, salute?
I have no idea,
What the heck was
because
that?
it was Daryl, it was Ward that ended up being the Bright.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure what purpose Jacoby even really served in the end.
Yeah, did he do anything? Trying to think back.
Maybe they're just saying they're meant to be partners or something. They're trying to make some political statement about, you know, opposites attracting and opposites working well together, having a full range or full perspective on.
And some Green Book stuff going on here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this film had a lot of really, had some interesting ideas, but I guess this film answers the question of, if you can make a realistic fairy tale movie and make it take place in current day, I mean, now I know what that looks like, and I don't know if that could be done well.
I mean,
That's my takeaway.
If they were actually trying to make it a fairy tale, this just seems like they were wanting to do a cop movie, cop drama / buddy cop thing. Because Will Smith is like, I feel like he's just doing his Will Smith thing, and that he's just trying to be cheeky every time he talks, and it's just his it's like he kind of didn't care. It wasn't my favorite Will Smith performance, a guy who usually exudes, charm, and he just seemed like he was phoning it in, and maybe he was for that some of that Netflix money.
Well, I mean, that's the whole theme of today's episode is Will Smith, and it's interesting that you raised that point, because yeah, I mean, at one point I thought he was like the golden boy of Hollywood a little bit. I mean, he made so many hits that were so good, and he kind of crossed genres a little bit. This did not happen this decade.
He was definitely the biggest star on the planet for a good
from
6 years maybe.
95 to 2004, 5. I don't know.
Yeah, 2007 I think was the last year.
That was I Am Legend.
Yeah, I Am Legend. That was like the last, I think, peak Will Smith.
Yeah. I would say that. I mean, so what? Peak Will Smith from what? Like Independence Day?
Maybe like Independence Day or Men in Black, I'd say.
What came first?
He was just, I think Independence Day came first. It was 95.
So Independence
96,
Day to I Am Legend.
And then Men in Black was 97. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're in the Will Smith is the genie phase of his career. So... All right, well, I guess that probably wraps it up for Bright. Let's move on to Focus now.
Okay, so now we'll be talking about Focus, which is basically just a con man movie. It's a story about this con woman who is not super great in her trade, and she meets Nicky, who is the master. He's been doing this all of his life. He was taught by his father, who was taught by his grandfather before him, and they ultimately fall in love. So what did you guys think?
Well, when I watched the film, and Danny and I, we're pretty sure we watched it together. I'm fairly certain. I mean, I thought it looked pretty cool at the time of watching it. Like, I liked the way that it was shot. I thought it looked cool. I feel like that was peak Margot Robbie, maybe. That wasn't long after Wolf of Wall Street.
Well, I don't think she's hit her peak yet.
Well, maybe she hasn't hit her peak yet. But I remember thinking, okay, this is Wolf of Wall Street, Margot Robbie. Yeah, it looked fine. I mean, one thing I liked about it was I kind of liked the small scale. I mean, we've seen con man movies, especially like the Ocean movies, where even though I like the third Ocean's movie, I know a lot of people hate it, but those films at a certain point, they're stealing $250 million, and they're doing so many, they've got guys on the FBI and the DEA, and they have, all these things that they're doing, right, that makes the scale seem so large. I kind of like for this film that it felt smaller scale, which made it seem more, I guess, kind of like realistic, somewhat, I guess, so to speak. But I don't know, I kind of thought it, at the end of the day, it kind of fizzled out for me. It kind of got a little boring. But Danny, what'd you think of it?
I think this movie rides and dies with the charisma of Margot Robbie and Will Smith. And I remember when seeing the trailers for it, I was excited because I had sort of missed that Will Smith. We hadn't seen him for a while. He'd come off After Earth, and
was that the direct movie before? I think that was the direct movie before.
I don't know.
Because After Earth came out 13. This is 15.
Yeah. So I was just looking forward to getting back to that Will Smith, and I kind of got it. And I really liked the first 35, I think maybe 40 minutes of the movie. The whole meet cute sequence where they meet, and she's trying to con him, right, but she doesn't know that she's messing with the master, and so he gets one back on her, and then they have this great pitter patter together that kind of forges their relationship. And I really like everything in the whole New Orleans sequence with the Super Bowl. I enjoyed all that. It's just once we get to that act break, which I think is really long, we jump 3 years ahead, and then it's just sort of like another movie. It does very much feel like two different episodes of a two-part TV movie, essentially. Especially even in the scope too, like you described, it is very intimate in that way, which is not a bad thing. But I don't know.
Well, what would you have changed with that? Would you have not done the time jump?
No,
or would you have done like a 3-month time jump?
No, I don't. It's not necessarily the time. They just feel separate. I mean, the two jobs have nothing to do with one another, except for Margot Robbie and Will Smith's involvement. And I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know what I would change necessarily. It just feels distinct and separate. Did you guys feel that way?
No, I mean, I felt that, honestly, when I was thinking about the movie, like I was thinking back to it, I actually thought the movie ended in New Orleans. Like in my mind, the movie, that was the last, nothing happened after that scene.
I think the best parts of it did, maybe. I don't know. What do you...
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it could have benefited if it started, when they were... Where were they? Was that in Europe?
In the first part of it?
No, in the second.
I think they were in Buenos Aires in
yeah.
Argentina.
Okay. Yeah, and then maybe they could have cut back to the night that they met or something like that to, give exposition as to when Jess and Nikki met or whatever. But, I mean, I didn't mind it. It did feel extremely separate, and you did have a lot of catching up to do to understand what had happened to both these people in that time. But yeah, I mean, I didn't mind it ultimately. Yeah.
It's not like it doesn't kill the movie, and I wouldn't say it's not worth a watch because of that, but it is something that I think, you describe it as a con man movie, and it is, and there's a lot of those, a lot of like crime caper movies, and I love those kind of movies. They're just always kind of fun and breezy watches. I just think that they're in the genre, there are better examples of it. I think the Ocean's movies, even all three of them, I know that some of them are not as well liked or respected as the others, but I enjoy all those movies. And even like a movie like Out of Sight, Steven Soderbergh's, like, I mean, they're not really, I guess George Clooney's a con man and it's a little different flavor, but there's a lot of great movies that involve heists and con men. And so if I'm feeling like watching that genre, Focus for me is kind of like lower on that totem pole.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. I mean, Ocean's 3 came out 8 years before this. I mean, I guess that is kind of a period of time between the two, but yeah, I mean, if you want to watch kind of a con man movie that doesn't feel too serious, like, you would choose all 3 Oceans over this. Like, those films, I mean, they're just all better. I mean, I feel like that's a very fair comparison, this movie to those movies.
Yeah. I would. I mean, I like those better, but that's the sheer star power of the cast of that ensemble. That outshines Will Smith and Margot Robbie. Although they do give it a run for their money, being that it's only 2 of them. They're both like really like magnetic on screen. I will say that. I will say that there's something about the chemistry between the two of them. I can only think of 2 films that they were in together. This and Suicide Squad, and I kind of like their chemistry actually. I mean. Now, Grant, maybe Margot Robbie just has good chemistry with people, because even in Wolf of Wall Street, I feel like she had very good chemistry with Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know, I totally fell for these two characters. I thought that they were both very suave and very likable, even though it was just completely impossible to trust him with anything. But I thought that that kind of built up the suspense in certain scenes, you know, because you can't trust him, and we're just as in the dark as she is most of the time. And so then you're stressed, and especially in that like gambling scene when you know he's not supposed to be gambling, and then the stakes seem so high and so impossible, and then there's just this great payoff of, you know, he's had this plan this entire time. And that's kind of how the whole movie goes, and the climax as well.
That is a great sequence. What do you think about all the twists, like the plot twists that happen?
So, I mean, this is just my opinion. I mean, I know it's super circumstantial, probably would never happen in real life. Not, but I love storytelling, and I love how fantastical it was and how many twists that there were, and I think that, you know, adds a wow factor to it, at least for me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, man, I thought the twists were fine. I mean, they were good. I mean,
yeah, for me, I just think there were maybe one too many.
Yeah.
It's ironically, I think after the gambling sequence, the movie actually loses focus. Like it doesn't. His whole thing is that you can't lose focus in this game because you're gonna get caught if you do. And I feel like the movie itself kind of got caught in all of their plot machinations, just, you know, taking us left and right. And in the moment, it's fine and makes it for an exciting watch. But then, you know, as you give it time and it sits and you marinate on it, it just, nothing really stands out as being that impactful, I would say.
So now we've talked about focus a little bit. So obviously we wanted to do a Will Smith related episode because Aladdin's coming out in the near future. I guess one question I have for both of you guys is, what was the last Will Smith movie that came out that was actually phenomenal? Like that you would actually rate very highly?
I was probably too young to remember, honestly.
Wow, that's something of a burn.
Yeah.
Right?
Says it all
I mean,
right
yeah,
there.
I guess.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I go back to I Am Legend, 2007. I think
Okay.
that was the last time I remember being like, I remember seeing it opening weekend, and it was just so exciting. The theater was sold out. I think it made pretty decent box
Yeah, I
office,
think it
like
opened at like
72 million
yeah.
or something.
At a time when that was very good for a December opening that was...
Yeah, December, and it's not, I mean, it is based on IP, but not necessarily like, you know, comic book or anything blockbuster-ish like that. And it was just all based on Will Smith, the movie star.
Yeah.
And I think that was the last time we saw Will Smith, the movie star.
Because everything since then, yeah, I mean, 7 Pounds, Collateral Beauty, which we'll review that eventually. Yeah, I mean, it just feels like we're watching like a husk of Will Smith. It doesn't feel like we're watching the same... Like, he has some of those elements, but it's just something missing. I don't know if it just doesn't translate as he's getting older, or if he's just choosing bad film roles. I mean, obviously, he hasn't... I mean, I guess you could say he hasn't necessarily seeped to Nicolas Cage levels of bad movies, but I mean, I don't know, because even with Nicolas Cage in the past 10 years, you can look back at some of his movies and say, okay, he has some actually good movies in the last 10 years. I mean, he's made a lot of garbage.
Trying to think. 10 years? So that's
well, Bad Lieutenant.
Was that? Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Bad Lieutenant. I really like Joe.
Yeah,
it's
Joe.
like a smaller movie. And
There's the one where he's trying to kill his kids.
yeah, Mom and Dad, I think. And
I
then
mean,
there's Mandy that came out last year.
yeah. I mean, those are... I mean...
Those are different kind of...
I mean, I'm just saying that, like, for Will Smith, I mean, it's so crazy to think that he's an actor that people still kind of talk about. Well, really, when you think about it, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the last decade, he really hasn't... His work is kind of a little lacking in terms of producing something either high quality or high grossing.
Oh.
I mean, I have high hopes for Aladdin. I think that Will Smith can play a smooth, you know, funny character. And so I think that he might fit this role okay. I mean, obviously no one will ever do Robin Williams. Well, no one will ever do what Robin Williams did or could do, but...
You have high hopes for Aladdin? That's going to be on this show, or that you're going to like to watch it?
No, that I'm going to like to watch it.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait for it to come out to review it because it looks awful.
Well, I think...
Really?
I think like so many people are being so hard on his depiction in particular of the genie, whether he's either too blue or he's not blue enough, or he's too Will Smith or not Will Smith enough. Like, the criticism is outrageous right now in the interwebs, and so I feel like when it comes out, it's just kind of be in the middle, and that's going to be considered a victory. I think he might end up coming out looking pretty good.
Yeah, but I mean, you watch the full trailer. I mean, doesn't the movie not look good when it's showing like every other person and like the sets?
I like the aesthetic. I mean, it looks colorful. It looks like fun. I don't necessarily know why there's a somewhat like Indian Bollywood aesthetic, given that it's an Arabian. I totally felt
that. Yeah, that's exactly.
Story. But
it feels like a Bollywood movie meets Will Smith.
You know, that aside, I mean, I'm gonna reserve judgment until I actually see the movie.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I have high hopes too, I guess you could say. Although I am a naturally pessimistic person, so
I am very pessimistic about. Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe it might be good.
It might be good.
Well, I'm naturally optimistic, and I love Disney, so
there you go.
I think it'll be okay.
That's all you need. Will Smith, Disney could be his savior. I don't think he's done a Disney movie before.
No.
Oh my gosh, is that true?
Yeah, I think this is the first time Big Willie and Mickey Mouse are working together.
Wow. I mean, because he did Shark Tale, but that was
it was DreamWorks, which is a fantastic movie, by the way.
Definitely not a meant for kids movie though. With the cast that it has.
Well, it's a mafia movie.
With Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro.
Yeah. Very underrated.
All right. Well, I guess that's about it for this first installment of Will Smith movies. Make sure to check out the rest of our content. You can see everything else on UCast Studios. We have the Domcast, we have the Talk Spot, and there are a dozen or so other Unwatchables. Thank you for listening, and check out the rest of our content.